Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Time Under Tension. Today, we are on episode 17, and we are finishing out our three-part series on parts and self. And today, we are talking about yourself, your true self, what it is, how to connect with it, and then some personal input from both of us on how we stay connected to ourselves or come back to ourselves when we do naturally start to drift away. But first, we have just kicked off a new year. And with that, I think it's an incredible opportunity to have a fresh start. I think there's a lot of stigma to a degree around New Year's resolutions. And we know from research that they don't tend to be very effective most of the time. But we also know that as humans, we love a fresh start. And so a new year, a new week, a birthday, those are all really great opportunities to set some intentions to begin to shift the tone of your life on a small scale, which we all know is what really leads to those big changes or even radical shifts. So, with the new year, do you have any resolutions or intentions that you've set?
Yeah, I think for me, it was really being aware of my lack of setting a process in place, having a process in place. So in the past, I've had New Year's resolutions or goals or outcomes of things that I wanted. And what I've learned is from just overall experience as a person, but also in what I'm learning now about self and parts is anytime there's an external goal, there's always an internal need that needs to be met. So for me, it wasn't about setting goals this year. It was about making sure that I had a vision for who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do, and making sure that the things I was doing was implementing a process in the day that protected me from falling into old patterns of behavior or feeling, oh yeah, I really wanted to get doing this again, like stretching or yoga, and actually putting it in my calendar. It was like I know the parts of me that don't serve me necessarily in rigidity, that help me in so many other aspects of my life, but really making sure that I added that into my new year was really a huge thing for me. So much more process focused.
That's great. Do you have an example? You mentioned yoga. Is that something you are going to do like at a certain frequency?
Yeah, so this is really what it is for me is I get up at 7, I make sure I'm up at 7, I'm doing my devotionals, I'm getting with God, I'm making sure that my priorities at the beginning of the day, the first thing I do is fill my mind and my body with truth that is going to propel me into the day in the right mindset for me personally. Once I do that, I make sure that I go right to the gym, get the gym over with. I've set a time frame around that because I know I want to be at the gym, so I tend to push my other priorities further down and just not even cap my time at the gym, which was a problem. Capping that, making sure I come home right away, meditate, and then I can start my day from there. I get out and I plan everything that I have scheduled, making sure I see it in front of me, and then I'm writing my top 3 priorities at the top of my page. Something that really helped me was getting the tools for this. Like I needed to go get a planner instead of just keeping everything on my phone. Like really writing things out has been huge. And then yes, yoga is like 2 times a week. I want to start doing yoga 2 times a week, and then stretching at least 10 minutes a day is where I'm at with that stuff. So yes, movements involved. I think something else that is helpful for me that I did before really incorporating all of this stuff was what is the what is my goal for each aspect of my life? So in my relationships, what do I want? In my career, what do I want? In my personal life, what do I want? And so with that kind of actual written outline, which I think it would be awesome if you talked about your year review exercise that you do. I think that would be super cool. But that was definitely what I did to get myself prepared to actually implement the process.
That's so great. Yeah, I think there's a couple different points in there that resonate with my process as well. At the beginning of this year, last week, I started reading Atomic Habits again, which is my third time, I think. I remember I had read it and then I got a DM from James Clear, the author, one day, and he was like, I want to send you this book. I think you would really like it, just out of nowhere. And I was like, actually, I've already read your book and I love it. But I never knew that it would be a book that I'd come back to multiple times. And since then, it's really blown up. So I'm sure some of you out there have read it. But if you haven't, it's a great read. It's like 5 hours on Audible too, so it's a really quick one. But one of the things he talks about is setting systems, not goals. So instead of just having a goal that you kind of put out into the universe, which talked about manifesting, I think there's something to that. But it's more about your system. So it's more about what are your routines throughout the day? Like each thing you're doing is triggering your next behavior to a degree. So setting a process for your morning as opposed to just saying, oh, I just want to, be more mobile or I just want to be someone who works out. It's like, okay, what does that process look like? What does your morning look like? What does that look like on your calendar? And so you've taken all of those tools and really put them into a system that works well for you with the level of balance between rigidity and flexibility that is unique to you and your need for flexibility. And I tend to be a little bit more rigid, but I've also learned that that doesn't work well for me either. I have to have some flexibility. So um, another thing that I've done is there is a YouTuber named Alexis Kingsley, and she has this small YouTube series. I think it's a three-part series on it's called Dream Life Visualization. And you review your last year, you kind of go over your highlight reel for the year, you do a forecast of a day in the life 10 years from now, and then a forecast of a day in the life 1 year from now, hoping that that 1 year visualization is a step closer to your 10 year. But I found that actually thinking about what does my day look like in a year or 10 years? What do I feel? Those are the deeper goals. Like you said, it's like yoga is an external practice, but it's to achieve a deeper goal because when you're more mobile, you're more connected to your body and you can be more relaxed and it probably helps your training. Like there's lots of other benefits to it as well. So finding those like big habits, anchor habits that actually trigger kind of a series of positive changes, I think is a cool way to really inspire change in your year. And when
Can
you
you
branch
can you
outside, go ahead.
talk a little bit more about yours? Like,
About
I feel like, yeah, I want to hear a little bit more personally. You're saying so many awesome things in terms of processes, but what does it look like for you? Can you give a little bit more detail about some of these, whether it's the anchor that you're talking about or what your process looks like from what you're getting out of the thing that you're implementing?
Yeah, definitely. So for me, I think morning routine is one of the biggest like ways to pivot my day. And if I make sure that I'm up before 7, that's usually when I'm most effective, is getting up before 7, drinking my greens, going to the gym, working out, doing my devotionals first, because those are something that I will procrastinate on. So the things that I find are most important, but aren't as second nature to me as, say, training. Like training, I'm going to make it happen no matter what. So, like you said, you almost have to put a time cap on some of those habits. It's making sure that I'm prioritizing the ones that I really want to make second nature at the beginning of my day. So, doing my devotionals, which kind of set the tone for my day, it gives me something to reflect on while I'm training. And then after training, this is varying. And I know I need a little bit more consistency around this. And this is part of kind of a new process for me this year where I do have goals and habits that I'm pursuing, but I also understand that when I'm super rigid, what ends up happening, and I tell clients this all the time, is if I have one day off, it kind of triggers this series of like, oh, well, I'm off track now. I failed my habit. now it's not a habit anymore. And so instead doing it as frequently as possible. And I have like a habit tracker in my planner that lets me kind of dot in what days I've done it. And I can see how frequently I'm following my habits. So my main habit that I'm trying to instill this year that I'm finding is a lot harder than not because I have so much internal resistance to it is writing. I know I want to write a book and I get so caught up on the end product that I lose sight of the fact that if I want to write a book, I have to write. I have to write every day, even if it's not saying, oh, I know exactly what I want to write about and I have a whole plan for the way this book is going to go. I keep wanting to see the end product. And I really need to work on my system, which is incorporating writing into my day. So my anchor habit is going to the gym in the morning. I do really well if I go straight from the gym to Starbucks to work, but starting my workday with writing instead of jumping right into my client check-ins. It's right now, my writing commitment is 30 minutes a day minimum, which I find if I do that, it ends up being a lot longer. Like I can easily write for an hour and I have no problem with that. But I need to do it first because what happens is if I keep pushing it later in the day, it will fall off and my motivation throughout the day will begin to kind of slow down. So I'm really effective in the first like 6 hours of my day. So I need to put this habit that I'm trying to instill early on. And I found that last week I deprioritized it and I said, I'll just write at any time. And that didn't work for me. I was doing really well. I was writing in the morning and then I fell off of it and I found that I'm not doing it in the afternoon. So this week, um, I'm gonna go back to all right, straight from the gym to writing. That's what I need to do because I already have that anchor habit at the gym that happens every single day, no matter what. So
Mhm.
it needs to trigger the next habit that I'm trying to instill because that one's already so deeply ingrained.
Can you talk a little bit about the part of you that comes up that maybe takes over when you don't set that routine in place or that process in place for writing, and how that process is allowing you to become the self that you want to be? I guess like bringing this back to the topic of the conversation is addressing our parts and actually seeing how the parts that we have can show up if we don't have these processes in place, but also then how the part still is able to feel heard maybe um in your overall day, but the highest self, this person that you know you can be and want to be, is actually able to shine a lot more with these processes that are almost putting that part maybe in their place where they do serve you best.
Yeah, definitely. I think this ties in really well. So, what I feel is one, I like to have a plan. So, this is probably the manager parts in me that really want to control every part of the situation. Writing is a creative process. Even if you are writing a technical nonfiction book, there's a lot of creativity that takes part in the process because there is no perfect way to organize thoughts. There are different ways and they have different impacts and they guide the reader on a path with various perspectives depending on how you decide to kind of structure that path. Well, in my jobs, in many of my jobs, my role has been to be very efficient and effective as possible. With nursing, you are managing a ton of different tasks. You need to be really efficient and effective at time management. I need to know that the kitchen's on the way to the med room, which is on the way to room number 6, which is on the way to room number 8, so that I'm hitting all those things in order to get to those rooms in like the most efficient amount of time. And working in a warehouse before that, it's all about efficiency of movement. But with writing, it's not very efficient. I'll have an idea about a certain concept and I'll think like, oh, that's something I might want to add into this book. But then I get caught up in the, well, where is that going to fit? And should I just outline the entire book? But when I outline it, I find myself even more resistant because that is butting up against my creativity.
Mm.
Then I don't want to write it because I'm like, oh, there's too much freaking structure now. Like I'm not letting myself flow. But then once I start thinking again and get in my thinking brain. My managers, who are so loud, they just take over and they're like, you're going to have structure. This isn't going to make any sense at all. No one's ever going to resonate with this book or buy this book. And you're going to spend all this time doing this, and you're going to quit it like everything else that you have. So I don't know what part of me that is, but it starts being a little bit abusive. And um, then maybe those are firefighters, and it's just like that, breaking away from it, ignoring the goal, just think maybe even shifting my focus to other things that are not priorities but seem like good things to be doing. Like, oh, I should write. Like before this podcast, I had about an hour, and I was like, all right, I haven't written today. I have an hour to write. And I'm like, only an hour. Like, I wish I had more time because I don't want to like have to stop it if I'm in a flow, which actually is a really effective way to write, is if you stop mid-sentence, because it allows you to jump back into the flow after. Side note. So I use that as a reason. And I thought, oh, well, I could do my budget now. That would be a really responsible thing to do. Well, I already have a time blocked on Sundays for doing my budget. But I was like, well, I could just get ahead. And I start doing that, and I start kind of fooling myself in that way. So those are kind of the parts that come up. There's like this fear of failure. There's even a fear of success. There's a fear of it not resonating or not turning out as planned. There's the fear of not having a plan. There's the fear of having too much of a plan. And then there's just the, well, forget it, not today. And I find that I have so much internal dissonance because my truest self knows that writing is a gift of mine. I have been told that throughout my entire life. I used to sit at my computer as a kid and write books for hours. I just had Microsoft Word. It was the favorite thing I had on my computer besides World of Warcraft. And I would just sit there and I would write books about fantasy stories and just all kinds of things for hours and hours on end. I remember like I'd have to pee and I like wouldn't get up to pee. And then by the time I finally go, I'd have to like waddle to the bathroom because I'd just be so engaged in writing. And when I was like 8, I asked for a thesaurus for Christmas. Like, that is my personality. And it's so deep to me that I know it's my truest self. And I think that's a cool uh, practice. If you're struggling to connect with your truest self, what did you do or what were you drawn to as a kid? Because that is like the most pure passion that is uninhibited by the insecurities that we develop or are put on us later in life. And there isn't usually, unless there's been significant trauma, this like fear of failure at that age, probably less than 12, before we start going into puberty and start doubting everything about ourselves. When we're that young, we don't really worry about being failures. We sit in class and they ask us, what do we want to be when we grow up? And people will say the president or an astronaut. And there's no like limitations in our minds most of the time, I think, in an ideal world. And so what were you drawn to as a kid? So writing was something that I've always really loved. I know it's part of my true self. And another thing to remember is I have this image pulled up, and it has like the qualities of the self, and it's calm, connection, compassion, creativity, clarity, curiosity, confidence, and courage. All of those things are so vital to the writing process. You have to be courageous. You have to be vulnerable. You have to be creative. You have to have clarity of your, maybe not the plan for the book, maybe not an outline, but clarity of a message. Like, what is it that you want the reader to feel? So I know when I'm feeling something other than those things that I have parts that are getting really loud. And right now I'm really starting to battle those parts. And you asked a great question. How do I put them in a place so that they're serving me? And that's something that I'm still learning. I think that my managers want to know that there's some structure. So I haven't figured out if I need to have like a specific mission for the book yet, or if I need to kind of take my managers out of this practice and learn that, okay, they can get their fix, so to speak, when I'm doing my planner in the morning, when I'm structuring my workout for the day, when I'm then sitting at my computer for hours after I write, doing client check-ins, and I need to be efficient and I need to make forms more user friendly. And I have like so many outlets in the day for the managers to be effective in and that they're very helpful in. But the writing process doesn't seem like one that they are super helpful in. I naturally organize ideas really well when I let them flow. But when I try to organize them, I start
Mhm.
getting a little bit stressed. So I think I just need to quiet them more. And then in terms of like exiles, addressing that fear of failure, I think a practice that really helped me with that was fear setting. And something that Tim Ferriss talks about, but actually writing out what the fear is. Like, what's the worst case scenario? And I've gone through this as I've started this book over and again. And I guess the worst case scenario would be I write this and I can't get it published, or it gets published and it doesn't resonate with people. And then what's the cost of that? Well, my time, my energy, but it's also a really powerful reflective process for me. So even if it doesn't resonate with anybody, maybe that would be okay. And then I had to dig into the deeper purpose. Part of that fear of putting a book out there and it not being received is, well, I'm hoping that it could be a source of income. I would love for writing to be a way to make money because it is something I'm so passionate about. And I do think that I'm pretty good at it. And I would like to get better and I would like to invest more time in it. But there's a part of me that wants to know that it will be successful before I commit myself to it. And
Mhm.
that's kind of a toxic trait of mine that I have to fight against, is like thinking that I can gauge the end game before I put in the effort. And really nothing in life works like that at all. Nothing. So it's something that I have to continuously learn over and over again. But the only way to learn it is by doing without expectation. And something that I eventually came to terms with, and I think is actually helpful to talk about now because I haven't thought about it, but it really helped me the last time I hit a block like this. If I tried to publish this and couldn't, why not just send it to everyone I know as a PDF and just get feedback from people? And maybe it helps one person.
Mhm.
Who knows? Or maybe I get feedback and I know that there's some things I need to work on. So there's always a benefit to something if you're willing to learn what the benefit is along the way and not try to predict what the benefit is. You need to, if you want to align with yourself, align with your passion, align with what you love, align with what you're drawn to, align sometimes with what people have told you you're good at. Don't hold on to that too much. But if you're getting kind of this repetitive message in your life, I think sometimes God sends people to us, people we really care about, and they say, like, hey, you did a great job at this, or this was really good. It's like, oh, okay, maybe that gives some insight into a gift that I had that I'm not really willing to celebrate in myself.
Mhm.
So I just think understanding that you need to trust the passion and let it lead you where it will, and then find out along the way and see it as an adventure. Because so many people who were successful in these huge businesses or writing a book or starting a family or moving across the world, they didn't really know what was going to happen. They were just doing what they knew they needed to do in the moment. They
Mhm.
were following a dream and it panned out, probably not in any way they would have expected. So, lastly, I think a little side example of this would be my feeling that I needed to go back to school earlier in the fall, and how I just felt so sure that God was calling me to do that. And I started it and I ran into a lot of anxiety really fast. And I had to really work through some of my struggles around performance anxiety and this need to please who I see as like an authority figure, my teacher, just a lot of stress around it. But I learned so much about myself in the two classes that I took. And
Mm-hmm.
I really proved myself competent so that I could show up and do hard things and take feedback and spend hours studying and just pushing out of my comfort zone and expanding my mind into topics I'd never even considered before. That when I decided I actually did not need to go to school and pulled out, I could have and did slightly feel disappointed and like I had wasted time or misheard God or made a poor decision. On the other hand, it was an incredible learning opportunity. I have this wonderful benefit now of not having a ton of student loans since I'm not doing that. But I learned so much in the process. And I also learned that if I ever do want to go back to school, I have what it takes, but I also know I'd much rather go back in person. So I learned so much through the process. But if I had been filtering the quality of the experience based on an outcome, which would be I'm going to graduate with a 4.0 and get a job and become a minister. According to that goal, I totally failed. So I think there's such a beautiful thing in setting goals, but I do think that there's an aspect of kind of putting them out there, letting them go, and focusing on what behaviors today are driving you towards that goal. That's why
Mm-hmm.
that 1 year and 10-year vision are so helpful, because the 10-year vision is like, I want a house, I want kids, I want to work 3 hours a day, I want to write, I want to do all these things, right? But like, if my 1 year vision isn't moving me closer to that, it's totally irrelevant what those big goals are. If my tomorrow isn't moving me towards my 1 year vision, it's totally irrelevant what those big goals are because I'm not actually moving towards them.
Mm.
So, last thing, because I know this has been a monologue,
Yeah, this is so good. So
my
good.
favorite practice for the year so far that has been just I mean, it has really shifted my mindset in the past couple weeks, has been what would my ideal self do? I have an image of my ideal self, like what she looks like, what she sounds like, how she interacts with her friends, how she prioritizes her day, how she says no to things, when she says yes to things. I have this whole image. It's like my role model in my mind. And this is the first time I've shifted away from comparing to an external role model to me in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So when I get into a situation like, okay, wanting to give up artificial sweeteners, I was fighting it for so long because all I could focus on was, I don't want to give this thing up. I don't want to do my life without this thing. I feel deprived, blah, 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 wah, wah. Just super sad. And then one day I was like, what would my ideal self do? I'm like, my ideal self would be someone who could make a decision and just make it on the spot and then go with it. She wouldn't second guess it. She would know what she needs. It's not that she doesn't trust herself. She just knows that, all right, it's time to rein things in with this thing, whatever it is. And it's not about deprivation. It's just about moving towards the person I want to be. So as soon as I did that, it's like, I want to make myself proud. So when, like today, craving for an energy drink has been crazy, crazy high. I had to sit there and go back to this journal entry that I made where I was like, I wrote to myself now as my ideal self. And I was like, look, here's what we're doing. Here's why. Whenever you start doubting it, remember this. And then I like literally signed it and like dated it and made it as a commitment to myself. And it's something that I can go back to, but it's not in my mind this daily thought of like, oh, should I stick to this commitment or should I not? Or I could just let it slide today. It's like, what would my ideal self do? That's the only filter that I need.
That was so good. I think there was so much there that really showed you actually working through your internal process in your mind. I think everything you just discussed really helped everybody see from this topic to the next thing that you're working through, full circle back to how all of those things actually come back together in your truest self, being able to be the best you that you want to be. And there were like multiple things that I really wanted to ask you during that, but I think just the realization of you saying, I'm not sure if like I need my managers in this process with writing, or I need them to kind of take a step to the side. And then all of a sudden by the end of it, you're like telling us why your managers need to step to the side. It's like actually talking through this stuff out loud and having that process internally where you're asking who you want to be and would my ideal self do this thing. You're actually able to become that ideal self that you are in the future, in the present moment, and work through where your parts can serve you and where they're not serving you right now. So I think just giving our viewers the opportunity to really hear all of that come through you speaking from your heart and just letting your whole process be made known in this situation not only helped you gather clarity, sounds like, but it also just provides a lot of information or tools or ways in which to approach a situation that align so much more with the process of how everything's going and letting go of the outcome. Something that your fear setting example really spoke to me in what I'm doing around fear, because I think fear is really the prime emotion that seems to come up and keep others from being able to become their truest self. It's like fear is so heavy in a multitude of areas. It is the actual emotion that stops us from forward progress. So fear in itself, the tool that I've learned through the book tools actually, is that fear, the example that they use in the book is that if you can remove whatever it is on the other side of fear and actually internalize just the fear in general about the situation, this makes sense. Let me try to say it a different way. So let's say for me, a fear of mine is public speaking. It's speaking in front of other people. It's on a phone call, being able to articulate myself. Anything around speaking really causes a little bit of tension internally for me. So when he was talking about fear and how fear is so connected to your shadow, which is a part in itself, essentially, it is the part of us that holds all of our insecurity. It is what we fear we're becoming. It's what we fear we look like. It's what we fear that is being expressed through language or just interactions with other people, period. Your shadow is literally your insecurity. And what he has you do in this book that's helped me so much is it really doesn't matter the fear, what's on the other side of the fear. What matters is being able to engage with what the fear feels like and be able to push through that to the other side. Because through that process of feeling the fear, you then project that fear out into a body and a face. And I know this sounds like super kind of out there, but stay with me because it's, I just had a client tell me that this process with fear actually, this practice that she did set her up perfectly for this interview. And she did it. She got it. She absolutely felt like it completely alleviated the fear, not only the fear, but also her insecurity in the moment. So her best self was able to come out, and multiple parts that are rooted in fear were actually able to feel like a part of the process, but felt cared for and empowered. So essentially what happens is if you can embody the fear inside of you, if you can close your eyes and you can really feel what that fear feels like. So my example is I'm picturing myself standing in front of this crowd that I had to give a talk to when I was in college, and I was just froze. I was just frozen. I was scared. I was fearful. I was worried about if I had something in my teeth, or if like my hands were looking right or whatever, and if I was going to actually be able to express myself the way that I wanted to. And so I'm picturing myself, I'm like in that situation, I can feel it like in my body, what that feels like, my insecurity. And when you become one with it, you give it a body and a face, knowing that it's your shadow. So you, whatever you were feeling in that moment, you give it a body face. For me, if you've seen that movie we watched with the sadness and joy and anger, sadness was what my shadow looked like. The short, plump, you know, stuff in the teeth, just sad person like this. And once you connect with your shadow and you see it out in front of you, now instead of identifying so deeply with that, identifying as the insecure person, as the fearful person, you're not letting the shadow become who you are in the moment anymore. You're letting your truest self be who you are, existing in the present, and you're looking at yourself insecure. And so you're able to, the exercise is to grab the hand of your shadow and step out in front of whatever, whoever, whatever the situation is with fear. And you, in your mind, command the people around you or whatever it is to just listen. In your mind, you just say, listen, and you command it, and you're powerful and you're yourself. And all of a sudden, this force of self-expression gets to come out, and it just flows, and you just are able to be this best version of yourself, understanding that you don't have to be the insecure, fearful person that has shown up in past instances. So that's an exercise that I do when I'm feeling a lot of fear. Even like fear of having pain is another thing that they talk about. Sometimes that's very present, is thinking about the pain you're going to experience on the other side of something. Like maybe for your book, for example, with wanting it to be published and becoming a revenue source, if it doesn't happen, like that could be really painful, and that could keep you from actually writing. So that's really just something that I've been doing lately in my own personal process, is making sure that I just get close with the shadow insecure part of me that has kept me from doing great things that I know I'm created for, like starting a business, you know? So in my new year, with my parts and my managers and firefighters and exiles and my truest, highest self, what I've come to learn is my highest self is so deeply ingrained in spirituality that when I enter into anything moving forward, if I don't keep my spirituality at the center, and I don't trust that my true self-expression is going to bring forth who I was created to be, then I get lost in all of my parts trying to take over and decide what it is that I need to do and where I need to be and who I need to reach out to. And it gets so business focused for me that I get out of staying connected to myself, like you're talking about, connected to my highest self, but also connected mind and body. So I just think our highest self it's within everybody. And once we can remove identifying as the insecure, fearful individual, all of a sudden that creativity, that courage, that vulnerability that you're talking about actually becomes a part of our true self-expression, and we actually become much more empowered and much more authoritative in our direction and where we're going. And something, I think, just one last note that I'll add on to that is my spirituality being the root, being the thing that keeps me grounded. I had to learn that. It was a learned experience in itself that I've had to constantly remind myself of, because it's new. It's came for me over COVID, but it was at that point that I realized this inner emptiness, that I was craving for, there's got to be more to this world. There's got to be something that I'm created to do. And all of this, actually taking these courageous steps forward and letting my parts serve me, help me just learn about what I went through and the truths I was holding, I can partner with them and make them serve me even more. But my spirituality and relationships being at the center helps me use those parts to serve for that spirituality. It helps it become greater than just me. It helps me step out of my own little mini world of perspective and see all that could be, which is what we usually mean by infinite possibilities. But the self is the way to unlocking potential, is the way to opening the door to infinite possibilities. Because if we can align with God, if we can align with that true self that is deeply connected to the source or the universe or God, then as we walk into our future, we understand that if we can partner, then part of our plans can be, and part of his plans can be, and we can create whatever it is that we want to create, understanding that there are parts of us that do not serve us. So we must find the higher self, because that's going to keep everything we're doing in the direction in which we're supposed to go or meant to go. I think sometimes we say, like, let's create this life we want, or let's have, I want these things, but sometimes what we want is not what we need. And just because you want it doesn't mean it's going to serve you in the end. So if we're only staying in our little world of what we want personally with the flesh, then we're unable to actually have growth. And then we end up just staying in these patterns of behavior. It's like the processes that we put into place have to be serving this self that is who we want to be, not who we have been. That makes sense.
That is so great. We all have a true self. And I think it can feel really discouraging when you're so used to your parts being so loud that you feel like you're so far beyond being able to really know what you want. But one thing I learned from lots of Tony Robbins courses and videos is we all have a blueprint for our lives in our mind, whether we're aware of it or not. So when we feel dissatisfied about something in our life, it's because it's not matching up with our blueprint. But if you aren't consciously aware of your blueprint, if you don't take time to visualize what your future looks like, and I'm not talking about creating a Pinterest vision board and you don't have to like color code your planner. I just mean, what are some like key things that you want to do or accomplish or feel in your life? It gives you something against which to measure your daily life right now. Like we look at life as a big whole or like as the next 5 years, and it's like that's everything in life is built on the next moment. So it's how you're showing up in the next moment. But if you're not sure of what you want or the person that you want to be, your ideal self, what's dictating your behavior from moment to moment? A lot of times it's our worldly desires, because in my point of view, we live in a world that's marred by sin where we're separated from God, and we can ask him into our hearts and he gives us his spirit. Like Jesus left his spirit with us, and our true self is what communicates to the spirit. But when we're so crowded by all the other parts in our life that have come up in order to try to help us in this broken world, and we're not able to differentiate our true self, we're going to feel that dissonance extremely frequently. And a lot of times we're going to be on a trajectory that's dictated by moment to moment emotions and not a bigger vision. So another side to the fear setting is not only saying, what is the worst thing that could happen if I do this? it's also saying, what is the worst thing that could happen if I don't do this?
Right.
Because that is some of the deepest pain of unfulfilled potential, and knowing that you're meant for more, that you have more to give, and you're showing up and you're doing what's in front of you, but like, you know that it's just not quite where you want to be or who you want to be or giving yourself in the capacity that you want to. And that is a really sad way to burn out in this life. Like, if you want more, like deeper passion, then you better expect a lot more fear. But don't let that hold you back. Like you said, there's ways to approach that fear and stand strong in the face of it. And every time you do that, you build this sense of self-competence that allows you to show up even braver in the future. It's not about disintegrating pain and fear. It's not about getting to a life free of those things. The more that you push into your purpose, the more that you align with your truest self, the more that you stand in front of your parts and say, okay, here's how we're going to do this, the more pain and fear and responsibility you're going to have, but the more joy and passion and fulfillment and connection you're going to have. And I promise you, the weight of those is so much more than the weight of the fear that you will face. And the growth internally and spiritual development and closeness with God, like, all of that is so impactful, way beyond the weight of anything that could threaten us in this world. So this process isn't just about, when we talk about self and parts, it's not just about teaching you a psychological theory. It's not just, okay, well, trauma happened to you and here's why you're broken. It's like, okay, for whatever reason, whatever happened in the past, it's good to go back and deal with that and talk to a counselor and do what you need to and make amends with people and learn how to forgive. Yes, 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 all of the above. But it's so that you can live a better life today. Like, that's the point of it all. And the only way to do that is to really dig into who you truly are and, who God's calling you to be in your life.
Mic drop.
Mic drop.
Yep.
So this was a little bit different than we had planned, which is exactly what I wanted. I think those are some of the best conversations, is just kind of letting it flow and see what comes out of it. Because I certainly did not intend to go into my whole writing process. There's definitely some shame there about not feeling like I'm showing up as the person that I want to be. But I know that it is that dissonance and that discomfort that is necessary to feel to drive me towards behaviors that I do want to embody. So I'm glad I got to share that with you guys. And I hope that resonated with any of you who might have set goals or started out on a process and failed over and over and over again. And I just want to encourage you, like, it's all about what you do next. The past is not evidence for your future behavior. So you get to decide today, in every moment, who you want to be and choose to align with your ideal self. So I would challenge you this week, start to get an idea of what your ideal self looks like. Maybe journal about it. And I will link that dream life visualization practice below, as well as the tools book that Dee referred to, so you can refer to those resources. And we will be closing out this series now. So stay tuned. We'll be planning the next one here soon. Do you have anything to add?
I would just say that there's not anything that you can't be. So just because somebody's told you something, or maybe you don't have great public speaking skills, it doesn't mean that you can't go be exactly who and do exactly what you want to do.
Definitely. So dream big, but then put what steps that's going to take in your planner today, tomorrow. Like, break it down to the daily habits. And would love to hear your experience with this. If this is something that you want to do, you can always reach out to us. Our emails are below, as always. You can check this out on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the above. Please be sure to share it as well. I hope this was helpful. And we look forward to talking to you guys next week on Time Under Tension.